Okay, so when I started off earlier today, I said Horshay Tuke, Ka'at Lashanka, Ka'at Ra'at Corrina. And what I was saying was good afternoon or good day. I'm Chochenyo and my name is Corrina. And that was the language, that was the very first language that was ever spoken in the East Bay. My great-grandfather was Jose Guzman, and he was one of the very last speakers of the language. And I had the opportunity to begin to study his language this past spring, because some crazy man went around and before I was born, figured out that all these languages were dying. His name is J.P. Harrington. And J.P. Harrington went and he wax-cylindered my grandfather speaking and singing songs. And he took down a bunch of dialect about what he spoke. And so because of that crazy white man, I'm able to learn my language today. Okay? So that's like really cool that something like that happened. Other cool thing was that all of this stuff was in Washington, D.C., and somebody from UC Berkeley borrowed this manuscript and never returned it. So it wasn't until 1990 something when these two professors retired and some students had the opportunity or the task of cleaning out their nasty office, they found this manuscript. And so now I get to be the beneficiary of that. And hopefully my grandchildren, when that happens, and not too soon, please, their first language will be the language of our ancestors. So you guys heard a whole bunch of stuff, and I'm going to talk about my issue, which is issues of sacred sites, but I think that we got to go back a little bit before I could start talking about sacred sites, right? So how many of you grew up in California? All right, so go back to 3rd grade. Do you remember learning about the missions in 3rd and 4th grade? You're making those little sugar cube things like that. When my kids went to school in 3rd and 4th grade and they were supposed to make those missions, I flat out refused to allow them to do that. And I wrote letters to their teachers and explained that my ancestors died because of those missions, and that my ancestors' blood was in those missions, and that my children were not going to have to sacrifice their childhood learning about that, and instead they get to make their own, what we lived in before was Thule huts. And I tell little 4th graders, like, we don't live in Thule huts no more, okay? We live in houses just like y'all. So sometimes we forget when we talk to people that folks don't have that history behind them. They don't remember. A lot of people in California, in the Bay Area, they don't know the history, or they don't remember back to 3rd grade when they were learning about the mission systems, what was happening. You know, the mission systems is still taught, and a lot of teachers that I go and talk to, they still think that the missions was a cool thing, that the Indians didn't have nothing here, and that they got taught a whole bunch of stuff when these missionaries got here. Well, let me tell you something. The mission system was the first prison system in California. Okay? And so when we talk about colonization, we talk about that. We talk about how does it relate? Well, my ancestors were in that first mission, in those first missions. And they actually were pulled from Vallejo down to Mission Dolores here in San Francisco. And they were enslaved in Mission San Jose and Fremont. And so, yeah, we were a part of that mission system, but that was that prison system that was first put here. So when you begin to think about your work in prison systems, if that's the kind of work that you're doing as organizers, there was a prison system that was set up here way before they put this other stuff inside of here. And they learned from that. They learned from those experiences of imprisoning my ancestors and how it would work, right? Okay, same thing. They're learning. They continue to learn. What I like to say is that we've had this history for a short amount of time, 500 plus years, right? But by the time these fools came from the other side of the country to California, after the Spaniards screwed with us and left, and they got beat up a little bit and gave up California, what they gave up was California. By the time those fools got here in the gold rush, they had already figured out how to eliminate us and how to continue doing that. They had become pros at doing that. Right? So they continue to do that. And how do they continue to do that? Well, for one thing, Ohlone people are not recognized as human beings in this country. We are not federally recognized. Native people are the only people that have to prove who the hell they are in this country. Y'all don't have to prove if you're Irish or Scottish or Italian or French or nothing like that, right? But Indian people have to prove who we say we are. And we have to jump through their hoops in order to do that. And we have to sue the United States government, right? We have to do all of that kind of stuff in order to prove who we say we are. Now, that's crazy. All right, so I know who I am, and I know where I came from, and I know all of those kind of things, and I'm blessed that I was able to do that. My ancestors, one of the last places that they lived at, because it was against the law, like Ross was saying, it was against the law in California. California spent $1 million killing Indians. Why? Because there wasn't that much gold here. Not enough for everybody. So those fools that came here and couldn't find gold, they went on the weekends and they killed Indians and they made their living that way. All right, all that stuff was going on, and so there was Indians that were hiding out, right? There was this drunk, and he was in the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and he kept being asked by the United States government how much land is needed for the homeless Indians in the Bay Area, and he wouldn't return their letters and their telegrams. And so finally they said, if you do not answer, we're going to make you come to Washington, D.C. and answer why you're not answering us. And so this fool, who was an alcoholic, wrote a letter, basically 1 or 2 sentences that say, for all intents and purposes, these people are no longer exist. So there's no more land. Up until 1926, Ohlone people had a government-to-government relationship with the United States government. Because this alcoholic said we didn't exist anymore, the government-government relationship stopped. Now, there's 7 different Ohlone tribes here in the Bay Area. They like to shove us all together, like, you know, Ross was saying that they put Pomos all together. There's 17, 18 different bands of Pomos. Same thing with Ohlone. We have at least 7 different bands of Ohlone people. We spoke different languages, as different as French and Chinese. 50 miles from here, you couldn't speak to another person your own language, right? But we had a way of talking to each other. We came from different places. We had different creation stories. We came from different places. My ancestors, the last group of them that lived together, lived in a ranch in Pleasanton. Today, near that ranch that they lived on, Safeway is digging up their burial site. 10 years ago, they pulled out 490 of my ancestors from across the street from there. Yesterday, I went and checked out the site that they're doing, and already they pulled 29 bodies out. And they're claiming that they're going to take 3 months to pull this out so everybody can have the convenience of a Safeway. You know, and I say, screw that. Not one more of my ancestors have to be pulled out of the ground in order for things to move on. We talk about, you know, how does what sacred sites do, how does that relate to the work that you guys do as organizers? Well, let's see. Development, right? We talk about organizing unions, right? We talk about collective bargaining. Well, guess who is working on those sites? Putting up those buildings, digging up those pipes, doing those kind of things. Those are union workers. And guess what? I got union people that call me up and say, hey, I'm on this site. And guess what? They're pulling up one of your ancestors. Well, you know, that's how I've learned out a whole bunch of work around it, a whole bunch of information, because I got those people that are saying, oh my God, that this isn't okay, you know? So when you start working with Indian people, you learn about a whole bunch of different kind of stuff, you know? Interesting thing is that, you know, we still fight these myths. We fight these myths that, you know, all Indians get a check from the government every month or whatever, you know, that we all get free education, you know, we could fish and hunt whenever the hell we want to. Well, those are all lies and myths. That's not true. It depends on the people you come from and the treaties that you have. And because we don't exist, because I'm a figment of your imagination up here talking, then we don't get none of that stuff. Because I'm still trying to fight the government to tell them who we are, right?